Now we've got to turn to the other massive story today. North Korea now threatening to walk away from that historic summit with, of course, President Trump. If it seems like this happened fast, it certainly did, all within the last 24 hours. It was just before noon on Tuesday that we got word North Koreans were canceling a high-level meeting with South Korea that was supposed to take place today. The official reason, joint U.S.-South Korean military drills, an annual exercise that Kim Jong Un says amounts to military provocation. Just a few hours later, the North, well, they went further, threatening to cancel the big summit between Kim Jong Un and President Trump just under a month away. This time, it was not about the military drills. Instead, the North says the issue is, quote, loose talk from the Trump administration about forcing them to abandon their nuclear weapons. A leading official called it, quote, a sinister move to impose on our dignified state the destiny of Libya or Iraq, which has collapsed due to yielding the whole of their countries to big powers. If the U.S. is trying to drive us into a corner to force our unilateral nuclear abandonment, we will no longer be interested in such a dialogue. Wow. In the last hour, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders responded by saying the administration is taking this in stride.
This is something that we fully expected. The president is very used and ready for tough negotiations, and if they want to meet, we'll be ready, and if they don't, that's okay too. We'll continue with the campaign of maximum pressure if that's the case, but like I just said, if they want to meet, the president will certainly be ready, and we will be prepared, but if not, that's okay. We're still hopeful that it takes place. We think the same thing we thought yesterday, that it's an important conversation to have, and it's something that we're hopeful that it does. This is the President Trump model. He's going to run this the way he sees fit. We're 100% confident, as we've said many times before, and as we all know that you're aware, he's the best negotiator, and we're very confident in that front. Sarah?
No, Sarah Sanders, we are not all aware that President Trump is the best negotiator. I appreciate that those are your views. I want to go to NBC's Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. Okie doke, Kelly, where do we go from here?
Well, keeping calm and carrying on is really what the White House position right now is, and it's not often the Trump administration likes to borrow from the UK, but that phrase seems to apply. They expected that there would be some ripple in this before 3.5 weeks from now when the meeting is set to take place. At the same time, it's curious because earlier in the year, one of the conditions was that North Korea would not object to planned military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea. And so objecting now is curious. At the same time, it is also expected that President Moon of South Korea will visit the White House next week. That is a part of the buildup toward these meetings. And so right now, the White House is saying they will continue the maximum campaign of economic pressure if Kim Jong Un does not want to be at the table. We've seen how President Trump has said he is prepared to walk away if there isn't progress even during the meeting. So this is one of those speed bumps that the White House claims they expected. At the same time, lots of phone calls are happening. The president's been checking in with the Secretary of State and his national security advisor, trying to sort of have a strategy for how to deal with this iteration. But it is fair to say that they have described for us for a long time that they expected some ripple in the energy heading toward June 12th because North Korea historically has not always been a predictable partner in any kind of international negotiation. So at this point, it's not what they'd like to see, but they are trying to play it cool and act like this is something that can simply be worked through.
Keep calm and carry on would certainly be a new lane for the administration, but it is a welcome one. And we are dealing with an unpredictable leader on the North Korean side, as well as here in the United States. I want to bring my panel in. Nayyera Haq is a former White House senior director and former senior advisor for the State Department. JB Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. And my old friend Bill Cohan, special correspondent for Vanity Fair. Nayyera, let me start with you. Should anyone be surprised by this? And I want to share a few headlines. New York Magazine headline, North Korea surprises administration by acting like North Korea. New York Times says North Korea's announcement a return to form. And Quartz says it was entirely predictable.
It was. You're dealing with personalities over process. That's where the value has been the entire time as the summit has come together. You've had Donald Trump, who's turned this into a massive PR stunt. Kim Jong Un, it's all about him and his dictatorship and how he's going to keep control over this country. There has been no official process of going back and forth and discussing what the negotiation is actually going to be about. The priority has been on having a big summit at the expense of any kind of decision. And Kim Jong Un, frankly, is taking advantage of that. He realizes that Donald Trump has put a lot of credibility on the line, had even publicly started talking about getting a Nobel Peace Prize because of this summit. And Kim is going to use that to his advantage. He's trying to get concessions from the United States and operating as anyone would in a proper negotiation process. Unfortunately, in this one, the United States does not have the upper hand.
All right, well, it was most likely premature for anyone to be awarding or calling that President Trump should be receiving a Nobel Peace Prize, but it's also premature to say the whole thing is destroyed. AB, I want to share what the New York Times said. Quote, the warnings caught Trump administration officials off guard and set off an internal debate over whether Mr. Kim was merely posturing in advance of the meeting in Singapore next month or was erecting a serious new hurdle. Sarah Sanders says that's not true.
Well, I think they don't know at this point because he was acquiescing and going along so smoothly that President Trump was saying, look, no one's ever even gotten us to this point before.
And he's right.
And at one point, right, he was, but at one point, Kim Jong Un was going to at least try to get the upper hand again and not have the weaker hand. He knew about these military exercises. There was no development that caused him and his government to make the statement that they did overnight, saying, we're not going to be Libya, we're not going to be Iraq. This was almost looks like it was planned. It's a bump along the path to raise the stakes, to inject some tension, and to try to get some leverage again. And pointedly at South Korea, he knows he has in President Moon a president who came in wanting a relationship with North Korea. He has in President Trump someone who wants a deal. I think it's not at all surprising that he was going to behave like his father and grandfather. Remember that the meetings he's already gotten with Mike Pompeo are historic and unprecedented. And the end game for the North Koreans is just even to have the summit in and of itself. The idea that they would just completely denuclearize has always seemed a stretch.
Exactly to your point, the Mike Pompeo meetings, huge development. If the summit takes place, that would be huge. So, Bill, what does the White House need to do to get that summit back on track?
Well, I'm no fan, as you know, of the quote-unquote Trump model of negotiating. However,
unpredictability can be a good thing.
Can be a good thing, and it has worked for him so far. I do agree, believe it or not, with Sarah Sanders when she says, we're going to keep calm and carry on. I think that's the right way. There are any number of historical precedents, but one of my favorite is during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Nikita Khrushchev sent the Kennedys 2 letters, one very threatening, we're going to blow up. We're going to start a nuclear war, one more accommodating, and Bobby Kennedy chose to ignore the first threatening letter and focus on the second, more accommodating letter, and that's the one he responded to. So in this situation, I think, you have to ignore this kind of feeling that we're going to blow this up and not have this summit and just continue on. Obviously, they knew about the war gaming that was going to take place. He's got to flex his muscles a little bit. It was too smooth the whole way. I think he's frankly testing Mike Pompeo, the new Secretary of State, and John Bolton, the new National Security Advisor. Can they react to this situation?
Yeah, not showing all of the cards that you have is the smarter way to play poker. I want to stay on the John Bolton front. Nayyera, the North Koreans singled him out, Bolton I'm talking about, and cited this quote as part of the problem. Listen.
I think the phrase that we've used and continue to use is complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization.
But what is the U.S. prepared to offer North Korea in exchange for denuclearization? Is it just sanctions relief? Might there be an embassy in Pyongyang? Might there be economic aid?
Well, I wouldn't look for economic aid from us. I think what the prospect for North Korea is to become a normal nation, to behave and interact with the rest of the world the way South Korea does.
Did the Trump administration overstep? North Korea also took issue with Bolton describing this as the Libya model for North Korea. If I'm Kim Jong Un and I say the Libya model, we know how that worked out for Gaddafi.
Right, and that's a country that was, again, a dictatorship in which the people were suffering. There was no real sense of anybody wanting to do trade with Libya the way there has been with Iran. That really all the Gaddafi and Kim Jong Un have to offer their people is that sense of the authoritarian military doctrine. And without being a nuclear power, Kim's not going to be able to maintain his control over not just his own people, but even his own military leadership. So the idea that he would immediately come to the table and denuclearize is very difficult for him to stomach. The idea of verification is exactly what caused North Korea to walk away from the six-party talks under Condoleezza Rice and George Bush. The benefit of having multi-party talks and bringing other people to the table is that the United States in that situation was not bearing all of the risk. There was additional pressure. You were able to spread the risk around to other countries. And the risk I mean is the risk of saving face. This is going to be very challenging for Donald Trump to figure out how does he come out of this with seemingly the upper hand and not looking like the United States has weakened its power in the region.
Can he do it with John Bolton by his side? The North Koreans write, "We shed light on the quality of Bolton already in the past, and we do not hide our feelings of repugnance towards him." In February, before Bolton had this job, he wrote a case for a preemptive strike on North Korea.
You know, it's amazing what other countries are doing in terms of studying the heart of the Trump coalition, his campaign promises. There were a lot of Trump supporters who really did not want him to pick someone like John Bolton. They were against this from the start, and he was talked out of picking John Bolton several times over the last year for different jobs. And this kind of this posture that Bolton takes traditionally in his career doesn't fit with what Trump promised on the campaign trail. Now, you see the Chinese, going after soybean farmers, and Trump is struggling to mitigate the effects of that on his own coalition, who are Republicans in those states facing tough chances in the midterms as a result of those tariffs. So they're very keen on hitting him where it hurts, and they know that Bolton is a source of dissent anyway, that there is not a perfect marriage between Secretary of Defense James Mattis and John Bolton, the National Security Advisor. So it'll be very interesting that they're not only trying to separate the South Koreans from us, but I think the North Korean leader is trying to obviously separate people within the administration as well.
Bill, the other thing that hurts President Trump, he gets his feelings hurt. We know this. I'm not saying it in a sassy way. And in the statement from North Korea, they go on to say, "It is a ridiculous comedy to see that the Trump administration still clings to the outdated policy on DPRK. If President Trump follows in the footsteps of his predecessors, he will be recorded as more tragic and unsuccessful than his predecessors, far from his initial ambition to make unprecedented success." Those word choices exactly hit President Trump where it hurts. He is a sensitive guy, and more more than anything, he wants to do better than Obama. He wants to do better than George Bush. And North Korea just said, "Sorry, little guy."
Well, and he wants to do things that neither of them could accomplish.
Yes.
So we know that's a big motivation for him, and it's nice that he's a sensitive man. That's very important these days. But I think that the other thing, bringing it back to reality, is that last week, President Trump tore up the Iran nuclear agreement.
He did do that.
Right? So if I'm North Korea and I'm thinking, that was negotiated over many years, very complicated agreement, and he's tearing that up in a day, then if I'm North Korea, why would I want to enter an agreement that he's just going to tear up and ignore down the road at some point?
Well, maybe if I'm North Korea, I don't want to have a contentious relationship with him because he shows he'll do something very unpredictable. Quickly, before we go, everybody's guess, yes or no, does the summit happen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nayyera?
Yes.
Wow,
Yes.
yeses across the board. Jackpot. Okie doke. We have to go now to the breaking news.